She transitioned from leading worship in church to performing as a background singer for Katy Perry all over the world. But now TASHA LAYTON is embarking on an entirely new season, releasing music under her own name from one of the most talent-packed cities in the world, Nashville. So you're a little bit nervous about coming here to Nashville. I mean, there's a lot of competition here.
Yeah, I mean, I thought to myself, why do I need to do this or do music when all these other people who are seemingly more talented than I, or at least I thought they were more talented than me, I thought, God, why do you need me? You know, and it was definitely intimidating when I got here because, you know, you get up to perform somewhere or lead worship somewhere and you look out at the audience or the congregation and you know that pretty much every person on that row could be doing what you're doing, you know? So yeah, Nashville is very, it's amazing and it's intimidating and it's wonderful, all of those things, all the above.
But you are doing well here. You're working on a new album. You just released a new single, Love Lifted Me. Tell me about that.
Yes, so Love Lifted Me really came out of a season of healing for me because I went through kind of a dark period in my life, and when I came out of that period, I went through a season of counseling, and my counselor said, you know, think back to those times that, you know, you were really hurt and you needed God to be there and you didn't think He was. Think back to those moments and allow God to take you back there in your imagination because God stands outside of time, He's still there in those memories. And so He took me back to those places and said, where was God and what is He saying to you now? And so the verse to that song is, when I think of those times I'm hurting, I think of you because you're there too. So that whole song was kind of birthed out of that healing for me.
That's so beautiful.
Yeah,
I
love the song, and it's reminiscent of that old hymn, when nothing else could help, love lifted me, like yes. The old hymn from church.
I remember that hymn.
Yeah.
And you grew up singing in church, and it was a good experience until it wasn't a good experience. What happened?
Yes, so I grew up in church, experienced a lot of amazing things, a lot of healing in my family and in myself, and was just really excited about God, excited about what He had for my life, and like a lot of people, just experienced some really painful situations in church and was hurt by church leaders. And I think it was about college age where I was going to a liberal arts college and I was studying a lot of humanistic philosophy, and I think that coupled with the fact that my church had experienced a split and I was really hurt by Christians, I couldn't reconcile that, that situation, and those two things coupled together just put me in a place of searching, and I could not find peace anywhere I looked. And I'd grown up in church, I had a really strong relationship with God, and I was judging myself for not being strong enough, because I thought, if I was strong enough, why would I be asking these questions? If I was really strong in my faith, why would I be doubting, and why would I be still feeling this way? And I think part of the more religious background was sort of those voices were telling me, like, you should do this, you should be that, your life should look like this. And I think after a while, I just went searching. I went to Buddhist meditation camp, I went to synagogue, I went to mosque, I studied mysticism in Europe for a summer. I just needed truth. And in the end, I just felt like any truth and all truth was God's truth, that if I could get to the truth. And after a long season of searching, that dark period became even darker, and I tried to take my life. And at my lowest of low, I think I realized that in all of these things, and all of these other religions, and everything I had sought out, you had to strive to reach God. Whereas in Christianity, He is in hot pursuit of you. He came down to earth, Emmanuel, God with us, and pursues us. And so that was the difference for me. And just a light clicked, and I thought, you know what? Faith is a decision, just like love is a decision. And I'm just going to decide to go back to church, and I'm going to decide to do these things whether I feel it or not, because I still was very numb. And I did that for about 1.5 years, and I went to a church, and the pastor said, you know, if you need a touch from God today. Come up after the service and we want to pray for you. And I left 3 hours later. I was a sobbing mess on the ground. They probably had to replace that portion of the carpet because I was just crying my hurt out. Everything that I experienced, I was just letting it out. And it was at that moment that I reached a turning point, and I decided, you know, I had forgotten about the call of God on my life. And so after that turning point and after that kind of release of emotion and where God met me in that place, I decided to go to seminary, and it took me to California, and that's a whole nother part of the story.
Yeah, you went to seminary. And so how are you doing at this point? Because you were in such a kind of a depression and, you know, the suicide attempt, all of that. So now you came back to God. Was everything solved? Did you have to work some stuff through?
No, it wasn't solved. I still felt stuck in some ways, but I felt hope. I don't think I felt hope when I was in that place. And when God reminded me of the call on my life and that He had a purpose for me, I felt hope again. And I felt like I had something I could work towards and a step that I could take, whereas before I didn't feel like I could see an end to anything or the next step to anything. And when I moved to California, it was such a step of faith. I mean, I had never been to California. I didn't know anybody, didn't have a job or anything. I was like, God, I know the plane goes both ways. And if it's not it, then I can always come home, you know? And so I went, and within a month I had a car. Somebody had given me furniture for my room. I got a job. I mean, everything, you know, when it's God, when it's like everything just lines up and everything you need is just provided in that moment. And I think it took several years of healing before I even felt like I had shaken off that season of I call it kind of the moment of darkness, like the dark season of the soul. It took a while, yeah.
Because you kind of come back to your faith, you're going to seminary, you're pursuing this great calling, but music was still off the table because you'd been so hurt.
Yes, so part of the area I'd been hurt in regards to church involved music, and so I stopped singing. I had not sang for years, and a woman came up to me in seminary and she said, you know, I'm looking for a worship leader for the women's meeting for the school, and your name came to mind. Do you do that? And I said, no. I just flat out lied to her, and I said, no, I don't do that. And then she came back to me a week later and she said, you know, your name is really coming to mind. I know you said you don't do that, but why don't you think about it, and I'll call you tomorrow. And I knew that God was asking me to do it again. And I knew musically it was probably going to stink. You know, I didn't have calluses on my fingers. My voice was out of shape, but I did end up leading worship for that event. And it was just so clear that the Lord wanted me to do that. And I felt so alive when I was doing it, using my gifts, using what I had to help people connect with God. And so I was a worship leader for about 4 years after that. And it was an amazing season of healing. And I think, I always tell people just loved me back into the church. Like, people loved me. Because I didn't feel like I'd ever gone away from God. I didn't feel like I'd ever run from Him. I was seeking Him out. I didn't know what form He was taking. You know, I didn't know what religion I would find Him in. But in the end, Jesus was in pursuit of me, and He was seeking me out. And I still get very emotional when I talk about that season of life, because I'm so grateful for how I've seen Him change me, how I've seen Him change my family, how I've seen Him change people I know. I mean, it's miraculous. Some people don't believe in miracles, but I think when you see a sinner saved by grace or someone set free who's been in bondage, that is miraculous. That's the gospel. That's amazing.
You know, I think your story it's unique, it's your own, but it's not unusual. I think a lot of people get hurt by something a Christian does or a church does or the organization, and they turn away from God. And I always say, don't blame God for what people do or what I do. Yeah. Talk to those people who have been hurt and have turned their back on God, and who He is versus who sometimes we are as people or as an organization.
Yeah, my mom would always say to me, you have no control over what happens to you, but you have every control over what you do with it and how you respond. And I don't have answers for the people who are searching. I don't think that I could fix that situation with anything I might say. But I do know that God cares about that, and that He wants to walk with them through it. And it's hard when you see bad things happen to good people to believe that God is still good. In theology, it's the question of theodicy, and how could a good God allow bad things to happen to people? But when I look back at all the terrible things that happened to me in life, and even that I self-inflicted, I think to Ecclesiastes, God has made everything beautiful in its time.
I love that verse.
And He's used those things. Everyone says, it's kind of cliche, but God won't waste anything. But He's used those things in my life to build character and to form integrity in me. And looking back, I don't think I would have had it another way. Sure, I have some regrets about choices I made, and I wish I'd found freedom earlier. I wish I'd sought it out more, different things that I could say. But in the end, His timing is so perfect. And I can't imagine a life more fulfilled now. But it took going through those things, and it took that pain. And, there's just like Republicans and Democrats, or, the far right and the far left, you always kind of look at the other side and make judgments. And I think just as much as people who have been hurt in the church make judgments towards the church, a lot of times people in the church make judgments towards them. And my encouragement would be to just let people question, let people go through what they need to go through. But if you have walked away from the church, don't judge the people who are in it. And if you are in the church, don't judge the people who are searching, because you never know. At the turn of a dime, you could be in that position, and something, a wave of grief could hit you, or a circumstance could happen to your family where you're needing God in such an unimaginable way. And so I would just say don't sit in the seat of judgment. It's His job to be the judge and the jury and everyone else. That's His job. It's our job to love. And it's so important for the church to love those people who are searching and who are bitter and resentful, because I was that person. And it was love that brought me home, not judgment, not them telling me what they thought I should do, not them spewing verses at me, Like, there is life in the Word of God. I'm not saying that. But when we use verses out of context to try to, correct people's behavior, that's not so good. And it doesn't usually work. It ends up pushing people away.
Love is so needed.
Yeah.
Well, you had an incredible musical journey once you re-embraced music. You auditioned for season 9 of American Idol. Tell me about that.
TV, you work in television. It's just its own world. The world of cameras and lights and sets and all that stuff. And I think having only sang in the church my whole life and being in that situation, it was so weird. It was so weird on some levels, but it was also felt natural in a weird way. And so when I ended up being on the show, I just was kind of having fun and okay, here we go. Let's do this. I felt a little bit at a disadvantage because I had only ever sang or listened to Christian music. So a lot of the songs that people were learning and singing for the show, I didn't know. So I felt like I was on this huge learning curve the whole week. And my stressor is always remembering lyrics. So I will always write like the first line of a lyric on my hand to remind myself. I don't do that anymore, but I used to do that a lot. I would get really nervous. But yeah, American Idol was a crazy ride, and you know, that they're interested in making good television. So sometimes it's not as much about talent as just kind of, does a person possess star quality or drama?
Good story.
Yeah, a good story for TV.
Yeah. But out of that, you were found by a talent agent. You got asked to tour with Katy Perry.
Yeah, so it's an interesting story, but I actually got a job singing for the Kesha Rihanna tour, and the morning of, I just woke up and thought, I don't think I'm supposed to do this. That still small voice of God. And I called them at 11. I was supposed to be there at 2 p.m. I called them at 11 and said, you know, I don't think this is right for me. And when I got off the phone, I thought, oh my gosh, I've just self-sabotaged.